Black kid in worn-out shoes went to bank to check account. Tycoon laughed until he saw the balance. Her shoes made the sound first. Soft rubber worn thin from too many miles, slapping against polished marble like a quiet apology. But the apology wasn't hers. The sound didn't belong to her spirit. It belonged to every doorway she'd been turned away from, every room where people stared too long or not at all. When she walked into the bank that morning, no one saw her. They only saw the shoes. Shoes that had survived mornings on cold sidewalks and long bus rides. Shoes that held stories people like them pretended didn't exist. But today, those stories were walking straight into their world, and the world wasn't ready. The first laugh came before the first word. Not loud, not bold. A sharp puff of air from a man in a navy suit who looked her up and down like she was a misplaced object. The second laugh carried more weight. It came from a woman wearing pearls, pretending to sip her drink while her eyes never left the fraying fabric near the toes of those shoes. But the real moment began when she passed the velvet ropes blocking off a private seating area. The billionaire banking tycoon sat in that section like a king waiting for his crown to be polished. His suit was dark as midnight, his shoes bright as mirrors, his watch glinted like authority. He didn't need to raise his voice. His presence did the talking. The tycoon saw her, and something in his eyes changed. Interest? Surprise? Annoyance? No one could tell. But he smirked, nudged his assistant, murmured something that made the assistant's mouth curl upward. Then came the whisper that traveled farther than his money ever could. Wrong bank or wrong life? The room exhaled at once, a silent agreement. They believed he was right. They believed he always was. But she didn't stop walking, didn't shrink, didn't lower her gaze. She held her little backpack close, the straps faded, the fabric soft from handling. That backpack felt heavier than it looked. Inside was her grandmother's rosary, wrapped in tissue paper so the beads wouldn't chip. It was the one thing she carried everywhere. Not for luck, for grounding, for memory, for strength. She pressed the bag against her chest like a shield, took a slow breath through her nose, and stepped toward the teller window. The teller barely hid her surprise. People like this girl usually entered the bank only to cash small checks or ask nervous questions. But today the girl's voice was calm, almost steady. "I'd like to check my account balance." Just 11 quiet words. But the tycoon made sure they didn't stay quiet. His laugh struck the lobby like a slap. Loud, sharp, purposeful. "Maybe," he announced in a voice made for attention, "we should start a charity box." His assistant laughed first, too eager to impress. A man in the back chuckled, then looked away as if ashamed. One woman shook her head slowly, lips pressed thin, torn between judgment and pity. The room became heavy, like everyone was holding their breath at once so they didn't inhale her dignity. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her backpack, and for a moment, her shoulders tensed. Shame rose from deep inside her, knocking on her throat like a stranger wanting to enter. But she swallowed it down. She kept her chin high. Her voice didn't break. "Could you check the balance, please?" she repeated to the teller, as if the tycoon's words were just noise on a distant street. Security guards shifted, sensing tension. Not danger, just discomfort. Camera phones lifted, catching moments that people would replay later, looking for reasons to laugh again. The tycoon leaned back in his seat, crossing his legs with practiced ease. His watch reflected the overhead lights like a small sun. He looked bored, annoyed, powerful. The teller typed. The keys clacked in a rhythm that suddenly felt like a heartbeat. Fast, then slower, then slow enough to make people glance at each other. She stopped typing, blinked, typed again, faster this time. The glow of the monitor reflected in her eyes, widening with each line she read. The teller swallowed hard, her throat moving once, twice. Her shoulders straightened. Sweat gathered at her hairline. For a moment she didn't move at all. Someone took a sip of coffee and missed their mouth. Liquid hit the marble and rolled toward the wall, but no one noticed. The assistant stopped smiling. A guard leaned forward, frowning. A teenager set down his phone without being asked. The room didn't go silent, it went still. Utterly still. As if sound itself didn't dare disturb what was happening. The tycoon's voice came again. Softer than before, but dripping with judgment. This better not take all day. But the teller didn't answer him. She pulled in a breath so long it felt like she was gathering courage from every corner of the bank. She finally spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "Ma'am, are you sure you want everyone to hear this?" Time seemed to pause. The girl blinked once, twice. She didn't look at the tycoon. She didn't look at the staring eyes or the phones quietly recording. She looked down at her shoes. The worn fabric. The little tears near the front. She remembered mornings when her grandmother polished other people's floors so she could have those shoes. She remembered wiping them clean with warm water when no one else cared enough to notice. She remembered every walk she took in them. Every time someone stared, judged, dismissed. She lifted her head again, eyes calm. "Say it," she said quietly. For the first time, the tycoon didn't speak. He leaned forward, breath caught, unsure why his confidence suddenly felt thin. The room waited, not because they wanted drama, but because something in the air told them the moment mattered. The teller inhaled. Her voice grew stronger. "Your account balance is..." She read the number. The words echoed. They echoed not just against the marble walls but into every heart and every stare and every memory of laughter aimed at her. Someone gasped. The teenager dropped his phone. The assistant froze with his hand half raised. A banker whispered, "That can't be right." But the teller didn't waver. She repeated it. Slower this time. Louder. The tycoon didn't laugh. Couldn't. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time in a long time, silence claimed him. Silence didn't need money. Silence didn't need power. It only needed truth. The girl didn't smile. Didn't boast. She stood still. Held her backpack close. But her shoulders rose higher, as though the weight inside wasn't heavy anymore. She didn't need anyone to clap. She didn't need anyone to apologize. The moment itself was enough. People shifted again, but the stares were different now. Not judgment, not pity, something closer to respect, mixed with shame that they hadn't seen her before. She turned slightly toward the teller, offering a nod. A thank you without words. The tycoon's fingers tapped the arm of his chair. Once, twice. A nervous habit hidden by wealth for years, now betrayed by surprise. He tried to speak, but the words stuck like stones in his throat. And just before she walked away, just before her shoes hit the marble again with that soft, determined rhythm, she whispered to herself. Not for the room, not for him, just for her. "Grandma, they heard you." Her breath was steady, but the room's wasn't. The moment the teller whispered that number, the air seemed to change shape. It grew heavier, thicker, as if everyone had stepped into water without noticing. 2 security guards, men who had seen fights, threats, and chaos, looked at each other with wide eyes, their hands hovering near their belts not out of fear, but disbelief. One woman covered her mouth so fast she dropped her purse, coins scattering across the floor like loose truths finally freed. People leaned forward, curiosity wrapped in judgment. The bank lobby didn't just hear the number, felt it, and yet the tycoon didn't flinch. He sat perfectly still, his fingers tapping his polished armrest with a rhythm too controlled to be natural. His pride wouldn't let him believe what the teller had spoken into the air. "Impossible," he snapped, his voice dripping with a rich man's certainty. "She must have stolen it, or someone deposited it by mistake." The crowd didn't laugh this time, but they didn't stop whispering either. Their voices fluttered through the room like dark wings, landing on her shoulders, testing her resolve. Doubt is a silent bully, never speaking full sentences, only nudging questions into the air. And in that moment, they weren't questioning the tycoon. They were questioning her. But she didn't dodge the stares. She didn't look at the floor. She kept her eyes on the tycoon, her gaze steady like she was rooted to something deeper than pride. "There's an inheritance," she said. Her voice didn't shake, but her fingers curled around the backpack strap like a lifeline. "But not the kind you understand." He scoffed loud enough to replace every whispered word. "Money is money," he snapped, as if the meaning of value began and ended with him. His assistant nodded too quickly, eager to echo his power without offering any of his own. The girl shook her head gently, and the motion carried more weight than his expensive watch ever could. "Money can be memory," she said. "Money can be sacrifice." There was a shift in the room then, small but real. A few people blinked slower, as if trying to understand what she meant. Others crossed their arms, protecting their walls. The tycoon felt the moment slipping from him, and his voice rose, hot with the need to reclaim control. "Show proof," he demanded. "Anyone can pretend." That sentence wasn't just an order, it was an accusation, and everyone felt it land on her shoulders like a stone. Her hands trembled as she lowered the backpack to the counter, but it wasn't the tremble of fear. It was the tremble of memory returning, the tremble of being seen after a lifetime of being overlooked. She unzipped the backpack, slowly, carefully, as though she were opening a wound she had learned to live with. Inside were letters sealed with ribbon, tiny knots tied with tenderness, protected from time even when life wasn't gentle. The paper edges were soft, the ink faded to the color of old bruises. Her grandmother's handwriting folded into every crease. She lifted the first letter with two hands, the way someone holds a photograph of someone they still love. The room leaned closer, drawn by something stronger than curiosity. She didn't read the letter aloud. She didn't need to. Just seeing those envelopes, those ribbons, those fragile pieces of proof, made some people breathe harder. The letters told stories without sound. Stories of double shifts and uniforms that smelled of bleach. Stories of coming home late and leaving early. Stories of saving pennies so her granddaughter would never have to kneel for approval. The silence wasn't empty. It was crowded, heavy as judgment, weighted with reflection, weighted with shame. The tycoon finally felt it too, but he refused to let the silence win. He leaned back, crossing his arms like a king refusing to surrender. His smug smile returned, even though the corners of his eyes flickered with doubt. "I can break this fairy tale in minutes," he announced, voice louder again, desperate for the crowd's attention. "Money doesn't turn poverty into royalty." She didn't react to his words. She placed the letter back in the backpack with slow, gentle hands. Then she looked at him, not as someone beneath him, but as someone who saw through him. Her eyes didn't shout, didn't plead, didn't waver. They simply told the truth her voice carried next. "You judge what you see, never what it took to get here." Those words didn't echo, they landed. They didn't shout, they sliced. People inhaled at the same time, as if their lungs couldn't hold the air anymore. The assistant looked down at his polished shoes, suddenly unsure what made them shine. One of the security guards cleared his throat, discomfort heavy in the sound. Someone whispered, "She's right," but no one admitted who said it. The tycoon shifted in his seat. He didn't stand, but it felt like the ground beneath him tilted. His smirk held for a few seconds longer, but his eyes betrayed him. They darted left, then right, searching for support he could no longer command. Silence didn't bow to him like his employees did. Silence didn't care about his money, his suit, his reputation. Silence listened only to truth. And the truth was standing in front of him wearing worn-out shoes. She closed her backpack and held it close again, the rosary pressing softly against her chest. Her voice didn't rise, didn't tremble, didn't break. "You don't know me," she said quietly. "You don't know what she gave up for me. You don't know the price we paid." No one dared laugh now. No one dared interrupt. Even the tycoon stayed still, though his jaw clenched once. Then again, like he was holding back words he didn't know how to release. A single question hung in the air. Not spoken, but felt. What do you say to someone whose story is written in sacrifice you never had to make? No one answered. Not yet. The fight was far from over. The tycoon's voice cracked through the lobby like thunder rolling over glass. It wasn't just loud. There was a command in it, the kind that came from years of people jumping at his slightest word. "Get the manager," he barked, as if the situation were beneath him but still demanded control. His assistant scrambled away, nearly tripping over polished floors that once knew the girl's grandmother's touch. The crowd watched, breaths pulled tight. Power had shifted for a split second, but the tycoon was grabbing it back with every ounce of his voice. The manager appeared moments later, adjusting his suit jacket as he walked. He didn't stride, he approached carefully, like someone entering a courtroom where the verdict wasn't certain. He nodded to the tycoon first, eyes dipped with respect ingrained from years of hierarchy. "How can I assist?" he asked, though everyone already knew. "Verify her," the tycoon ordered, voice low and sharp, each syllable clipped like scissors cutting through thread. "Verify everything." The word everything echoed 2 beats longer than it needed to, enough time for doubt to latch onto the air. The girl said nothing. She didn't defend herself. She didn't argue. She stood still at the teller window, her fingers brushing the rosary bead tucked discreetly in her backpack, the bead her grandmother kissed before mornings filled with mop water and ammonia. Her thumb rubbed it slowly, rhythmically, like she was remembering not just a person, but a promise. She lowered her eyes, not in shame, but in reverence. Silence wrapped around her, not weak, but steady, like armor her grandmother left behind. The teller printed documents with shaking hands. The manager reviewed them with eyes that darted, scanned, and widened. Pages turned, signatures examined. Archive files were requested, dusty boxes pulled from storage rooms no one had touched in years. A clerk ran across the lobby, carrying papers pressed against his chest like a fragile truth. Minutes stretched into small eternities. People shifted, whispering less now, as if their words might break something sacred. Each tick of the clock weighed heavier than the last. The tycoon leaned back, convinced the world would right itself. His belief was unshakable. Money spoke the loudest, and his money screamed. Whenever his voice had once thundered, doors opened. But this time doors were staying shut, and the room felt different. Uneasy, like the truth was moving beneath the surface, waiting to break through marble. When the manager finally returned, he no longer looked like a man serving a king. His shoulders had lowered. His walk had slowed. He held folders in his hands with care, not urgency. He didn't address the tycoon first. He looked around the lobby, taking in every face, watching, judging, waiting. Then he spoke, not with volume but with weight. "The account," he began, pausing long enough for the room to breathe in, "belongs solely to her." The sentence landed with force. People straightened. Someone gasped, small but honest. The manager continued, voice a little steadier now, as if the truth itself gave him backbone. "Every cent was earned and saved by her late grandmother. 43 years of labor, cleaning offices in this very building." The silence that followed was different from the silence before. It wasn't tense, it was heavy. Heavy with realization. Heavy with regret. Heavy with the understanding that while people walked across shining floors without thinking, someone else had scrubbed those floors on her knees, hands raw, back aching, body tired, dreams deferred. Eyes drifted downward. People stared at their reflections in the marble, the same marble her grandmother polished while they hurried past, never asking the name of the woman who made their world cleaner. The floor seemed to shine brighter in that moment, as if memory rose up from every tile, whispering her grandmother's name back into the room. The tycoon swallowed hard, eyes frozen. Wealth had protected him for so long, given him certainty, authority, unwavering confidence. But now his voice wouldn't come. The hierarchy he trusted, money above labor, power above humility, trembled beneath him. His lips parted, but no laugh escaped. His smirk vanished, replaced by something raw, something unfamiliar. "She worked here?" he whispered, voice thin, stripped of its armor. Those 3 words weren't a question. They were an admission that he had missed something important, something right in front of him. The girl raised her eyes, and when she met his, there was no gloating, no triumph, no revenge, just truth. "She mopped your office," she said softly, each word deliberate. "You never looked at her long enough to remember." A murmur rippled across the room, quiet but unmistakable. People who once stared at her shoes now stared at their own hands, unsure what to do with them. The woman who covered her mouth earlier lowered her gaze, shame pressing against her chest. One of the security guards rubbed the back of his neck, eyes wet, remembering every time he nodded past a janitor without seeing them. The tycoon blinked rapidly, eyes shining, not with tears, but with realization. His face drained of color, his jaw tightened, but his voice couldn't rise above the weight of what he felt. Wealth had always lifted him, but now it anchored him down. He looked at the girl again, and for a moment the room seemed to fade. Not because she had won, but because he finally saw. Not a number, not a balance, not a girl in worn-out shoes. He saw the echo of a woman who never stopped giving, never stopped saving, never stopped believing. His throat tightened as he whispered the only words he could manage. Words that tasted like humility soaked in regret. I should have known. For small words, but they cracked open something larger. It wasn't an apology, not yet. Apologies spoken from pride sound hollow. He knew it. The crowd felt it. The girl understood it. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She simply stood straighter, as though invisible hands touched her back. Hands tired from years of labor but strong enough to lift her one last time. Her grandmother had left money, yes, but she had left something richer. Dignity passed down like an inheritance of spirit. The tycoon looked away first, eyes falling to the marble. The same marble she once shined. The same marble that now reflected his face not as a king, but as a man who finally saw he had been blind. People waited for him to speak again, to command, to belittle, to reclaim his throne. But the words didn't come. Silence filled the space where his power used to be, and for the first time in his life, silence held more authority than wealth. And though the moment was heavy with transformation, no one moved to comfort him. Because some lessons, especially the ones that come late, must be learned standing alone. It was too late for prideful apologies. Too late for excuses shaped like regret. But not too late for change. Not yet. And the girl, back straight, eyes lifted, knew the fight wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. He took a step toward her, then stopped, as if the ground beneath him had changed. The polished floor that once echoed his confidence now reflected back a man stripped of certainty. The crowd didn't move. They watched him cross the distance the way someone watches a person walk across thin ice. Not knowing if they'd make it, not knowing if they deserved to. His shoes barely made a sound this time. Power didn't carry them. Pride didn't push them. Something quieter did. Something he hadn't listened to in years. When he finally reached her, he didn't stand tall. His shoulders curved inward, his head dipped slightly. The words that came out of his mouth weren't rehearsed or practiced. I misjudged you, he said. 3 small words, but they shook the room like a confession no one expected. His voice didn't boom now. It cracked, thin around the edges, as if forced through a truth he didn't know how to speak. The girl didn't rush to answer. She let silence rest between them for a moment, long enough for him to feel its weight. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her grandmother had taught her long ago that dignity grows where pride fails, and the tallest growth is quiet. Finally, she nodded once, slow and gentle, as though acknowledging something larger than both of them. When he extended his hand, his fingers trembled, not from age, but from humility unfamiliar to him. She looked at that hand and hesitated, not because of anger, but because of memory. In her mind, she saw her grandmother's hands, calloused from wringing mops, cracked from cleaning chemicals, steady even when life wasn't. She accepted his hand not for him, but for her. For the woman who scrubbed his floors without ever being seen. Her voice was soft, but every word landed firm. Use your position better, she whispered. Look at people, not through them. Something shifted then, not in the building but in the people. The lobby seemed to exhale. The tension dissolved, leaving something heavier behind. Reflection. A banker with perfect posture wiped her eyes quickly, pretending she was only adjusting her glasses. A guard looked down at his shoes, remembering every time he ignored someone who dressed like struggle. A young man who had recorded everything lowered his phone, the screen suddenly feeling cold in his hand. It wasn't judgment anymore. It was recognition, realization, responsibility. The tycoon swallowed, his throat tight. He wasn't used to feeling small. Not in his buildings, not in his boardrooms, not in his banks. But now he understood that smallness wasn't always weakness. Sometimes it was the beginning of growth. He cleared his throat, though his voice didn't rise. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. "To make this right?" She looked at him. Not angry, not forgiving, just truthful. "You can't repay 43 years, she said gently. "No one can." The words didn't accuse, they accepted reality. But acceptance wasn't the end. She loosened the ribbon around her letters and slid one envelope into his hand. The paper was yellowed at the edges, soft like something handled with care for decades. "But you can honor them," she said. "Start there." He didn't open the letter at first. His fingers held it like something fragile, something sacred. When he finally did, the paper trembled between his hands. He read in silence, and the silence said more than any speech he'd ever given. The letter spoke of things beyond numbers. Missed lunches to save money, late nights scrubbing floors, coins tucked away instead of comfort bought, hope passed down instead of rest taken. As he read, his eyes softened, his jaw unclenched, his shoulders lowered, revealing age he had hidden beneath power. For the first time in a long time he looked older, not weaker, just human. When the last line settled into his heart, he folded the letter with care and held it against his chest. Not as a possession, but as a promise. His voice dropped to a whisper that felt like a vow spoken to the air, to the floor, to the memory of a woman he never saw. "I will never laugh at someone's beginning again." The girl nodded, not in approval, but in acknowledgement. Some changes don't need applause. They need time. She didn't wait for more words. She didn't linger for gratitude. She didn't demand anything from him. Not money, not favors, not praise. She just turned to leave, her backpack pressed to her chest, her grandmother's rosary hidden safely inside. Her shoes were still worn, the fabric still thinning, the soles still tired. But the weight inside her heart had shifted. The path ahead didn't feel narrow anymore. It felt open, like every step forward honored someone who walked behind her. When she moved, people didn't stare at her shoes this time. They watched her walk with a different kind of respect, quiet and steady, the kind that doesn't need to be announced. The lobby doors opened. The outside lights spilled in, warm and bright, washing over her like a blessing. She paused at the threshold, just long enough for the moment to settle. Long enough for the watching eyes to understand they had witnessed something worth remembering. And as she stepped forward, the truth rose behind her. Not shouted, not forced, not decorated. Just spoken in the way real lessons always are. Quietly, clearly, permanently. Never measure a person by what they wear. Measure them by what they carry. The doors closed slowly, but the lesson stayed. It lingered in the marble, in the whispers, in the spaces where judgment used to sit. People returned to their routines, but not the same way. Some walked slower. Some nodded at the janitor sweeping in the corner. Some lifted their eyes when someone entered with worn-out shoes. The tycoon stood alone in the middle of the lobby, letter still in his hand, watching the door where she disappeared. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. His silence said enough. Because for the first time in his life, silence spoke louder than wealth.